Let's go back to the book of Mark, chapter 5. This morning, Mark chapter 5. And I want to read actually a number of verses this morning. It's a story, and I want to kind of get the whole thing for us as we focus on Jesus' work here on what might seem to some to have been sort of untouchable, somebody who's beyond being reached. And I'd like to speak to you this morning on crisis conversion. Crisis conversion. Mark chapter 5 and verse number 1. And they came over unto the other side of the sea into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, this is Jesus asked the demoniac, What is thy name? Or actually asking the demon. And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there were there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine. These would be pigs. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they that fed the swine fled, and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they come to Jesus, and see him that was possessed with the devil, and had the legion sitting, and clothed, and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coasts. And when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. The demoniac, or now the healed man, wanted to go along with Jesus. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. Conclude there with verse number 20, and I know that's a little lengthy, but it is the story of this man who was totally transformed by the power of God, and we have to recognize where that really comes. I know there's all sorts of self-help and various programs and things that are used these days, but really sometimes it just simply comes down to the fact that Jesus has to deliver the sinner. And I want to deal with that a little bit here today. It's a beautiful story of the compassion of Christ toward this man who to many would have been a terror. He had terrorized the countryside. He had been terribly corrupted by sin. And it seemed like sort of a strange contrast here, even as we start to look at how other people dealt with him. You look at Jesus and he had compassion. He was tender-hearted toward this man. And then you look at the villagers, and they, of course, have been terrorized. And it seems strange when you get to the end of the story that here these people sent Jesus away. You would think almost that they would have welcomed him to be there, that they would have wanted him to heal their sick and ease the troubled minds and various ones of that sort. But the truth is that Jesus can only transform those who allow him to do so. He can only really work and only do his best work, at least. I know God, in numbers of ways, he does influence the sinner, even in trying to pull them to himself. But really, they have to agree. They have to repent. They have to come to him. And of course, in this case, he gave victory to this raving maniac. And you find him later on here sitting clothed and in his right mind. And then you go to the situation with the villagers, and really, strange as it may seem, The real blessing came to the one who seemed beyond blessing, perhaps. And then, could I even say a curse came to those that maybe, Jesus maybe would have had in mind to do great things for them. I know he was human, and maybe it's a little different, but I kind of just wonder if Jesus, in his divine side anyway, didn't know this man was going to be here. Maybe that's really the reason he came. I don't know that for sure. Maybe he came for the rest of them and they just wouldn't receive him. But it seems like very possibly Jesus knew this man was going to need a touch that no one else could give. And he was able to deliver this man. Of course, with the villagers, on the other hand, they were impacted in ways they didn't like. Of course, for the Jews, they weren't supposed to have pigs. I'm not sure who all was even raising these pigs, but if they were Jews anyway, they shouldn't have even had them to begin with. But he couldn't help them because they didn't want to be helped. And again, that is the case so often even today. But let me just mention here, as we kind of get started in the message this morning, that Jesus does not come. He did not come then. He does not work with us even now just to put a Band-Aid on the sin problem. That's not his purpose. That's not what he wants to do. It's more like surgery, really. He has to go to the deepest part of our soul and deliver us from that bondage to sin, the cancer that works on the inside. He doesn't just come to coddle or encourage the sinner. Again, yes, he draws the sinner. He does have compassion on the sinner. And just last night at the youth convention there at Galax, we heard a message on the prodigal son and being welcomed by the Father. And yes, that's what he does, but he doesn't just want to only make the sinner feel better, but he wants to transform him. There needs to be a crisis conversion. Now, obviously, don't forget, Jesus did love and spend time with the sinner, and really even to the point where the Pharisees accused him for it. They didn't want to have much to do with these sinners, but Jesus did. Jesus had compassion on them, but he focused on setting them free from the bondage, not just making them feel better, not just coddling them or encouraging them. And really, again, that's still his desire today. He wants to transform us, to change us, to make us into the likeness of Christ. And when Jesus steps in, it's amazing the change he makes. There's a variety of songs. Thanks to Calvary, I'm not this man I used to be, and things of that sort. But there's another one that's kind of based on John 9:25, where the blind man said, basically, I don't know where this man came from, but I do know this. Whereas once I was blind, now I can see. And it kind of goes kind of a spin-off of that idea. And here's just a few of the words that are in that song. It says, basically, instead of asking me about how I can prove that God is there, here's a few questions to ask. You go ask the man who's found a way through tangled roads back home to stay. Go ask the child who's walking now, who once was crippled. Go to the one whose burned out mind has been restored. Go ask the child who's got a dad to love away the hurt he had before this man called Jesus touched their lives. There's a number of those types of things. Go ask this one who's been changed. Go ask that one whose life has been restored. Go ask those who have seen the crisis conversion in their own lives, and they know the change that's been made. You go ask them. I know there may be many that even today might scoff and scorn, and they don't think that the plan of salvation is really real. They don't trust the gospel. They don't trust the Christ of Calvary. But I'm here to tell you this morning, he still transforms lives. And so let's just take a few moments to look at this story here of the what we sometimes call him the demoniac, the man possessed with the unclean spirits. Legion, maybe referring to thousands of these demons that were in him. I don't know all the significance of all of that, but anyway, let's look at that story and just remind ourselves, or maybe be blessed, hopefully, by even the confidence that God still transforms lives. You can have a crisis conversion. The first thing we'll notice here this morning is just that sort of laying the foundation here with this, again, we call him a demoniac, the man who's possessed by the devils. And there are those, and there is the situation or the status of those who are bound by sin. Those bound by sin. And this part highlights really what might be considered the main character of the story here. Obviously, Jesus is really the main character, but when we start talking about the situation, we usually are referring to this man. And so he's there among the tombs. His life has been a wreck. He is bound by sin. He's being governed by these demons. He'd been a menace to the society, and his life had really, to many, probably seemed hopeless. Probably many would look at this man, hear him crying out there in the cemetery, as we might say, among the tombs, and they might think, oh, that's hideous. There's just no hope for him. I hope that he just dies or goes away or something. That's what they may have felt. He's the kind of guy that you warn your kids to stay away from. Don't you ever go out past such and such. Don't go toward that cemetery. Could be harmed. There's an awful man out there. Sin had taken his toll. It had impacted this man's life. And he now was even possessed by this multitude of demons. I don't know if that's why he got out there, or, eventually I'm sure that's the reason, but I don't know how much he had been a renegade, how much he had been rebellious in his youth. I don't know where the demons came from or when they came into his life. I don't know all those answers, but he was a menace. He was bound by sin. It seems like he was obsessed with the dead, with harming himself. And by the way, it seems like that happens even today. There are numbers that are just bound by sin and maybe even dabbling in witchcraft or various forms of that. And they become obsessed with death and darkness and again, self-harm and various things of that sort. Let me just notice a few things about this man that we find here indicating some of the awful situation in his life, the hard life that he was living. The first one I'll just notice with you is his reputation. Yeah, he had a reputation. A hard life that couldn't be tamed. There's no hope for him. Remember how it tells us there that they bound him with chains, but apparently he would tear them loose. Sometimes it seems like those that are mentally unstable just have incredible strength. I don't understand all of that, but it apparently was the case with him. Perhaps even through the power of the demons, he is able to just break those chains. People knew about him. I have a feeling that the whole countryside around there knew about this man. They knew that he was a menace. They knew that he was bound by sin. Maybe they weren't thinking of it quite that way, but that he was possessed. The Bible doesn't exactly tell us. Obviously, there was some interaction, some verbal interaction here with the demon and Jesus. I don't know if he normally would have spoken that way. I have known of a situation before where it was a strange voice that came out of this person. Not that man's voice, but the voice of a demon. And this man had a reputation. He was some of the worst, one of the worst among them. Sometimes maybe we may look at those around us who have a reputation. And yeah, we know they're bound by sin. And we know that maybe their life has been a mess. We maybe know a little bit of where they've been. The reputation of a hard life that couldn't be tamed. Along with that is that there was also a manner of rejection as well. Yeah, the reputation went before him. They knew about this man, but it also was something that they had him. I don't know if they were trying to bind him in the tombs or if they were trying to make sure he stayed out there, but they had tried to bind him. He was an outcast, lived away from the rest of the people. Yeah, there were apparently some people herding swine, trying to keep an eye on them. They must have been somewhere nearby, and it seems as though there were a few that were able to tell, we saw what happened. Verse number 16. We saw how this took place, but largely speaking, they would have stayed away. This man is rejected. He's an outcast. We don't want anything to do with him. Why is that? Sin. That's what it comes down to. The life of sin caused him to be put away from society. And then, of course, part of that is ruin. The third aspect to this life of sin, being bound by sin, is it brought ruin. He was a wild man with no hope. For many, they probably figured he would die that way. Someday those demons are going to get him. Notice that what happened even when the demons entered into the swine, they took them off. The demons made the swine go right off into the lake there, and they were drowned. Why didn't it happen to this man before? I don't know the answer. They could have probably destroyed him as well. Could have caused him just to throw himself into the sea and be drowned as well. I don't know. But they were ruining his life. And could I just tell you here this morning, sin will ruin your life. Don't ever let even the slightest sin go unchecked or without repentance. Don't think that somehow you'll get away with it. Don't think that you're living freer than ever. No, you're bound by sin if you have not been delivered. There are many around us today, and perhaps sometimes even in our church, those who face dark days of hopelessness. Maybe nobody else knows. The outward looks pretty good, but they are bound inside. They feel hopeless. They feel like, I don't know that I could ever get right. I don't know that I could ever really, truly know God in a real way. They feel hopeless. Sometimes we may blame people's choices. And yeah, that's a big part of it. But really what it comes down to is they are bound by sin. Oh, it's so tragic the many times that people have created their own chains by the choices they've made. And because they fill their mind with this, or because they look on that, because they get involved in this some habit or whatever it may be, and they begin to bind themselves with chains. We are bound by sin until a crisis conversion. But thank God this man found one. Oh yeah, there are many people hoping for a way out. I believe this man probably was. Although obviously, probably the demons speaking in him saying, what do I have to do with you? Just leave me be. Don't torment me. Probably again, the demon. And yet this man also, notice verse 6, I don't know, again, the Bible doesn't tell us specifically, but I have a feeling that there was something in the man that when he saw Jesus, he ran and worshiped him. But then the demons began to take over him and no, we don't want this. Get away from us. I think that's what's happening right there in verses 6 and 7. And so there's that conflict going on. And he was bound. I do believe that there are many who wish for a way out, but they just don't know how it can ever be. Jesus is the only answer. And so let's look at that for just a little bit here this morning as well. The blessing by the Savior. Thankfully, though people couldn't solve this man's problem, the villagers had probably given up on him. Maybe it seemed like there was no hope for him. Jesus still was able to meet the need. Again, I mentioned it earlier, but I know Jesus was human. And yet I have a feeling, or a kind of wonder at least, if maybe Jesus was thinking about this man when they went across the sea. Whenever they were coming there, maybe that's really who he came for. Oh yeah, if he could help some others, that'd be great. But maybe he was coming specifically for this man. I don't know that. I understand we don't always know just which part is, but Jesus is all human and all divine. We don't know what all he knew maybe ahead of time. But I have a feeling he maybe even knew about this man and knew he would be there. He wasn't afraid of him. Oh, the people may have been. They were afraid of this violent, insane man. And yeah, he had given them reason to be afraid. But Jesus wanted to bless them with deliverance. It's amazing the transformation that took place. No longer a raving maniac. He's sitting there, clothed and sensible, worshiping Jesus probably. Don't know all that was involved there either necessarily. But when they saw him sitting and clothed and in his right mind, the villagers knew this is strange. This man never does this. This man never looks like this. They were afraid. God had transformed him. And this morning, there are people around us that, just to be honest with you, sometimes we might be afraid of. Afraid of the mess afraid of the, lack of answers, afraid maybe even sometimes of their violence, afraid of what their addiction might do if you try to speak to them, afraid if they come to church, how are we going to deal with this? God help us. Jesus is not scared of the sinner. Jesus is not scared of the worst of sins, the messed up lives. He's not afraid of it. He knows exactly how to solve the problem. He wants to give the blessing to them. He wants to transform their lives. Even for you this morning. Maybe He needs to transform yours. And He wants to do it. He's not afraid of your situation. He's not afraid of how messed up you've become. We may not know personally, physically, humanly, we may not know how to restore. We may not know how to bless or to even give the right advice. But Jesus does. Jesus knows how to solve the problem. Jesus knows how to transform and lift up and make them new. And again, I'd say He can make you new if you need that even this morning. The chains are not too big for Him. The bondage is not too big. The viciousness, the violence is not too harsh, not too scary. But Jesus wants to meet the need. He's never overwhelmed by the seriousness of the bondage. He's never overwhelmed by the questions that we even have. He's never overwhelmed when we feel like the road back is too far. But He wants to give a blessing. As another song says it this way, God's grace reaches farther than sin could ever go. Praise His name. Blessed by the Savior. Yes, there are those bound by sin. They need a crisis conversion. And thank God Jesus can give it. I want to touch on one more thing, though, and I know this may almost be ending in a negative, but we have one more aspect to this story. And yes, we have the man who was possessed by devils, bound by sin, transformed by Christ. And of course, that gives us the next aspect, Jesus Himself, being there. And how did He respond? And what all was involved? It's a wonderful story of redemption. But then there is also this issue of the villagers. And I want to at least give this as a bit of a warning to us. Because sometimes we might find ourselves in almost the same situation. Maybe it's not exactly the same. Maybe sometimes we're just simply afraid, and the villagers were that. But they also somehow seem to be bitter against the solution. That's the third aspect I want to look at here today. Bitter against the solution. And under this part just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like that should be the case. How could anyone, could I say, begrudge the answer that came for this man? How could anybody be sorry that he had been forgiven and transformed? Well, maybe that's not exactly what they were sorry about. But they weren't thrilled with the transformation, apparently. They were afraid of the transformation and then angry about, at least I'm assuming that's what was going on, angry about the loss of the pigs. Again, it was probably something they shouldn't have even had to begin with because of the law, the Mosaic law, the ceremonial law, various aspects of that, what things they were allowed to eat and of that sort. You would think, surely these people would have wanted Jesus to stay and resolve all the rest of the situation. This one's sick, and could you go over here and heal this man? You know what? I have a relative who's been maybe not quite so bad as this man, but there's something wrong with him mentally, and could you help him? No, that doesn't seem to be what they're concerned about. Just get away from here, Jesus. We're uncomfortable with this. Again, I don't know if their issue was fear over Jesus' power or maybe fury over the loss of the pigs. I'm not really sure. Whatever the case, they asked Jesus to leave. Tragic. An awful thing. You wonder why anybody would do that. But did you know that kind of response can still happen today? Did you know that sometimes people get uncomfortable with God's presence? They don't like when God starts working. They wouldn't say that, of course, but it makes them uncomfortable. And sometimes it may be, as I mentioned earlier, and it may be somebody that, they get saved, but their life has been a mess. And we don't know how to solve it. We, pray and ask God to help you. And I don't really have the answer for your situation. All those things. I understand to some extent. I do understand. We don't always have the answers for all the messed up lives, but could I say that we ought to be celebrating when Jesus reaches a lost person instead of fearing over how we're going to work with them? Shouldn't we be rejoicing along with Jesus and the disciples and even this man? Wow, what a transformation. Thank God for that. We're really not worried about where we're going from here. We're just worried about knowing that this guy or this woman, whoever it may be, has been saved. They've been truly saved. There's a crisis in their life. A transformation has happened. But yet sometimes when it begins touching on our livelihood or our comfort levels or maybe even the way things have always been, people sometimes may prefer to go with the status quo and just, don't rock the boat. They don't want Jesus to really do too much here because that makes me uncomfortable. What a sad day when Jesus is asked to leave a church because we aren't comfortable with his work. When it seems like, oh, I don't know, this one's messed up and that one's messed up. We got to be careful here because that starts getting so judgmental anyway. But I do understand. Sometimes people have questions even. What am I supposed to do about this in my life? And what about these habits that I've had? And how do I get out? And where can I go for help? And yeah, there are rehabs and various things, even Christian ones that maybe sometimes we can try to help with, but it's uncomfortable sometimes. How do I really be sure that they stay clean or that they really walk in the light and just all of those things? But God help us not to get bitter against the solution. I don't like that Jesus saved them. Again, we not hear those words, I'm sure. But that's about the way it ends up coming out. I mean, if you really get down to honesty, it's about what it is. I don't like them around here. I don't like them because they make me uncomfortable. That's apparently what happened with these villagers, but God help us. I believe God has a much harsher judgment for those like these villagers that he has to turn away from because they say, just, you go away. I'm not comfortable with this. Well, thank God Jesus is the answer for the worst chains, the worst brokenness. Jesus knows how to solve it all. And God help us to be the men and women who are close enough to Christ that we see people as lost souls. We see people as those who are hungry after God. If you're bound, Jesus can set you free. If you're broken, Jesus can mend your life. But he can do the same for countless ones around us. There could be a crisis experience. Oh, sure, it was a crisis for the villagers, but not a good one. But in this man, oh, what a crisis. What a transformation happened. Because Jesus stepped in. Praise his name. Maybe you even know somebody here this morning. It's been sort of a source of fear, source of worry for you. Oh, where are they headed? How can God ever reach them? Maybe it's even somebody that's pretty harsh right now because of the power of the enemy in their lives, the power of sin, the bondage that they're in. But could I tell you that Jesus can actually make them gentle? I've seen it myself in my own family. What a wonderful thing to be able to see the miracle of a transformed life. Could I just urge us here this morning? Number one, if you are bound, let Jesus completely set you free. But then maybe if you are the bystander and you're looking on and you're wondering, could you just cooperate with the Lord? Let him do the miracles he wants to do. Cooperate with him. Reach out to new ones. See souls saved. Proclaim the gospel message of freedom from sin. And help bring people to the same crisis. The same enjoyment of this transformation. God help us to be the hands extended to the lost and dying around us. And may we truly see the transforming power of Christ at work in our day, in our community. Praise his name.